All right, let's talk about one of the most iconic and, let's be honest, complicated figures of our time, Steve Jobs. We're going to go way beyond the myths to try and understand the man, the mind, and the core operating system of his genius. Okay, let's just dive right in.
I mean, that's the real question, isn't it? This is the puzzle that defines his entire story. He didn't have the typical engineering degree, no MBA from a fancy school, so what was his secret? How on earth did this guy repeatedly upend entire industries from computers to music to phones?
And the answer really comes down to this one simple but powerful idea. Jobs was convinced that technology couldn't just be about speeds and feeds. It had to be human. It had to be beautiful. It had to feel intuitive. This core belief, this fusion of art and algorithm, was the engine behind literally every single thing he ever did.
To really get who he was, we have to rewind. We've got to go back to the beginning, because his entire philosophy, everything he became, can be traced back to just a handful of key experiences in his youth that basically programmed his entire worldview.
So Jobs knew he was adopted, but he completely flipped the script on what that meant. He rejected any idea that it made him feel abandoned. Instead, he saw it as proof that he was chosen, that he was special. And this cultivated this incredible sense of independence and this almost unshakable self-belief. His response to anyone who even hinted that his adoptive parents weren't his real parents was always sharp and always the same. They were my parents, 1000%.
So after he drops out of Reed College, he doesn't actually stop learning. He just starts learning about the stuff he was genuinely curious about. And the single most important class he just wandered into? Calligraphy. He was absolutely mesmerized by the art of typography. His professor even called it all-embracing and mystical. And look, this wasn't just some quirky hobby. This was the exact moment that art got hardwired into his technological DNA.
I mean, you can see it right here. You can draw a straight line from his early life directly to his business strategy. His adoption story, that fueled his constant rejection of rules and norms. Dropping out to just follow his gut, that led to his focus on intuition and having total vertical control over his products. And that calligraphy class, well, that led directly to the beautiful, elegant fonts on the very first Macintosh, which made a computer feel personal, artistic even, for the first time ever.
So armed with this one-of-a-kind philosophy, Jobs co-founds Apple. But that same uncompromising vision that made him brilliant also created this massive internal conflict that, well, it would lead to one of the most famous firings in the history of business.
What you're looking at here is basically a civil war inside Apple. By 1985, you had the Apple II division, the company's absolute cash cow, pulling in a staggering 85% of all sales. But to Jobs, that was the past. He was pouring every resource he could into his baby, the Macintosh, and totally neglecting the product that was actually paying all the bills. He was more than willing to burn the profitable present for his vision of the future.
Okay, and a big part of that vision was the graphical user interface. Icons and a mouse. Now there's this huge myth that he just stole the idea from Xerox PARC. But the reality is way more interesting than that. The Mac project was already happening, and the GUI itself had been kicking around in labs for decades. So here's the key takeaway. Jobs' genius wasn't pure invention. It was synthesis. It was taking existing, clunky technology and refining it into something beautiful, intuitive, and something you'd actually want to buy.
And yeah, that vision ultimately got him kicked out of his own company. But the decade he spent away from Apple, it wasn't a failure. Not even close. It was the absolute crucible that forged him into the leader who would come back and, well, change everything.
So his first venture after Apple, a company called Next Computer, was a commercial disaster. It flopped. But, and this is a huge but, it produced an absolute strategic masterpiece, the operating system NEXTSTEP. It was so powerful and so stable that when Apple eventually bought Next just to get Jobs back, this software became the very foundation for Mac OS X, the thing that powered Apple's entire comeback.
At the same time, he buys this little computer graphics company from George Lucas, renames it Pixar, and for 10 years, a full decade, he poured his own money into it, funding these crazy guys, as he called them, who had this insane dream of making the first feature film entirely on a computer. And that journey taught him two things he desperately needed to learn: patience and how to actually build and nurture a truly creative culture.
And his leadership style just completely transformed. It was like night and day. The young Macintosh-era Jobs was famous for being a tyrant, for publicly humiliating employees. The Pixar-era Jobs, he was different. He learned to give his brutally honest feedback in private, what his employees called a gut punch analysis. that was designed to guide his creative teams to find the better answer themselves, instead of just having his vision forced on them.
So when he finally walked back into Apple in 1997, he wasn't the same guy who left. He was a different leader, armed with a whole new level of strategic thinking. He wasn't there to just build cool products anymore. He was there to build entire ecosystems.
And he did it with this brilliant, escalating strategy. It was like watching a master chess player. Step 1, the iPod and iTunes. They completely blew up the music industry by breaking the album apart into 99-cent songs. Step 2, the iPhone. It didn't just compete with other phones, it redefined the entire category with a seamless integration of hardware and software. And finally, Step 3, the App Store, which created a brand new global marketplace out of thin air, changing how software was made and sold forever.
When you lay it all out like this, the pattern is it's undeniable. Every major product didn't just compete in an industry, it fundamentally rewrote the rules of the game. He turned computers from hobbyist kits into friendly appliances with the Mac. He created a legal digital music store with the iPod. He invented the freemium app economy with the iPhone, and then established an entirely new way to consume media with the iPad.
But how did he do it? How did he get his teams to deliver these game-changing products on what seemed like impossible deadlines over and over again? Well, the answer lies in one of the most legendary and maybe misunderstood tools in his leadership playbook.
It was famously called the reality distortion field. Seriously, the term was actually coined by an Apple engineer way back in 1981. He borrowed it from an old Star Trek episode to describe Jobs' almost supernatural power to convince people that his version of reality was the only one that mattered.
But look, it wasn't some kind of magic spell. It was a strategic tool. It was a projection of his own intense, unshakable, almost fanatical self-belief. And what it did was it convinced brilliant engineers to just throw out the conventional wisdom about timelines and what was and wasn't possible. He bent the organization's perception of reality, made them believe that these impossible goals were totally achievable, and then, more often than not, they went out and actually did it.
And his impact, it goes so much further than just the phones in our pockets. His final years, and just the sheer intuitiveness of the things he created, they left behind this powerful legacy that honestly, nobody really saw coming.
You know, Steve Jobs survived for 8 years after being diagnosed with a very rare form of pancreatic cancer. And while his personal decisions about his treatment were complex, his very public battle brought critical global attention to neuroendocrine tumors. It was a relatively unknown disease, and his fight created this huge new wave of awareness and research.
And this might be the most surprising part of his legacy. The healthcare industry is notoriously slow to change. It's famous for it. And yet doctors and hospitals started adopting the iPhone and the iPad almost immediately. Why? Because they were just that easy to use. These devices were so intuitive, they smashed through decades of resistance, kicking off the mHealth revolution and literally transforming how patient care is delivered.
Which brings us to one final thought. Steve Jobs proved, beyond any doubt, that a single, uncompromising vision can absolutely change the world. His relentless pursuit of perfection gave us some of the most beautiful and revolutionary products in human history. But it also came at a huge cost, both for him and for the people around him. And it leaves us all to wonder, if you want a true evolution, what really is the price of perfection?